Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am bringing to you the wrap up of all of the books that I read in the month of January. The first book that I finished in January was this one, The Conversion by Amanda Lohrey. This book is very similar in vibes to her previous book, The Labyrinth, which won the Miles Franklin Literary Award, I think in 2020, so relatively recently, in the last couple of years. So this is the sort of follow-up to an award-winning book, so I had high expectations for this one because I did quite enjoy The Labyrinth. What I will say about this one, so first of all, let me give you a quick synopsis. So firstly, we've got a woman who, her husband had this dream of buying and converting a deconsecrated church in sort of a small country town. And then, this is not really a spoiler, he dies, because this happens you find out quite early on that he's died. And she'd sort of been quite resistant to this idea of buying this property. And then when he dies, she decides to buy it. And then she sort of gets a little bit lost and she's not really sure what to do, how to go about actually converting the space, because, you know, its initial design was, the purpose of it was, quite different to the purpose of living in a building. So actually converting that kind of a space, you really do need to have the eye of somebody who can kind of work out what to do with all of the vertical space and so on. So yeah, that's sort of the main plot of the book. It's not a very plot heavy book. It's much more of a character driven woman goes through some stuff, plumbs the depths of her soul kind of book. And she sort of, it's very reflective. And that is, I guess, the main way in which it mirrors The Labyrinth, because it sort of had that same vibe as well. What I will say about this one is that it really did have, it was well researched, but then the way that research was kind of inserted into the text was quite jarring for me. So I found it really, interesting, and specifically about architecture and, design, that sort of thing. And she sort of just has this friend who happens to be a designer in that way and talks about design theory with her. And that just sort of felt like a little bit jarring for me, in the sense of it just felt very much like an insert of the research that the author did. Also, there are some side characters in this book, and I didn't feel too specifically. There is a woman who is a client of the husband that's died, and there's also a woman who is kind of like a drama teacher. And I will also say, this teacher is mentioned on the back of the book, and the teacher does not enter this book until more than halfway through. So it just seemed really weird to me, because it sort of mentions her, and then she didn't actually turn up until about halfway through the book. So that was a bit odd. But also her story, so these two side characters, I just felt like there wasn't really enough resolution to their story arcs, and like what happens to them, and why they make the choices they make, and how that's impacted the people around them, including the main character. So yeah, there were a couple of things about this that weren't 100%. I wasn't 100% on board with. I did still give it 4 stars, because yeah, I really enjoy that sort of really reflective literary fiction kind of genre. It's also really refreshing to read main characters who are not 25. So, it's good to sort of engage with a book that has an older main character. And by older, I mean like in her 50s, I guess, early 50s maybe. So, it's just good to kind of have that in our in our canon now, you know, to have some sort of older characters. So, The Conversion by Amanda Lohrey, 4 stars for me. I quite enjoyed it. The second book that I finished was a book I don't have a copy of because I borrowed it from my mum and I've returned it to her. And that is Another Day in the Colony by Chelsea Watego. This is a book that is not, I am not the intended audience of. Very explicitly at the beginning of the book, she states that she has written this book for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I am not one of those two things. I am a white Australian, so I am not the target audience of this book, and I will proceed my review of it with that. Now, I will say that there were some really interesting and well thought out stances and opinions that the author puts forward. Basically, so the author is an Aboriginal woman, and she is talking about her experiences and the experiences of people she's spoken with of living in Australia day to day. So it's sort of looking at the kind of ongoing racism that has come about because, as she says, another day in the colony. So this is, you know, Australia is a colony of Britain, and its very foundations are racist and are against Aboriginal people. So it really, and she's sort of talking about basically about the ways that continues to manifest in the current day. And I very much agreed with a lot of the stances that she made. I agreed with, you know, her opinions about certain aspects of this book. However, there were others that I didn't agree with. And I particularly felt that her stance on what she referred to as ambiguously Indigenous people was quite harsh, given the circumstances by which, you know, that sort of a person who has a sort of, you know, what she's sort of saying is an ambiguous link to their Aboriginality is actually the direct result of the thing that she's talking about. Also, I guess, so she's a Queenslander, and for those who are aware of the like geographic differences in Australia, you know, people's experience living in different parts of Australia is quite different. So her experience of living in and around Queensland would be quite different from, say, for example, Sydney, where I live. And there are a lot of Aboriginal people in Sydney who have, because there are communities in Sydney that are made up of people who are not living on their ancestral land, the land that their people are from. And usually that is because of racist policies of the past, including the stolen generations and so on. And she does address this in the book and maintains her stance about what she terms ambiguously Indigenous people, which I felt that it was a very harsh stance and not really reflective of the entirety of Australia, in my opinion. Also, there's and I'll give you the page reference if you want to have a look if you're following along at home. Page 164, she talks about, she mentions Andrew Bolt. Now, Andrew Bolt is a right-wing commentator in Australia, and in my opinion, he is a racist person, and he gives racist views about things. And she acknowledges that her opinion on this matter of ambiguously and Indigenous people, it sort of kind of like comes out the same as Andrew Bolt's, and she tries to kind of like talk about the nuance of how her stance is different to his. And I am just of the opinion that if you have to make that distinction, it's probably not as nuanced as you think it is. Yeah, so specifically in this instance, they're talking about Aboriginal people only claiming Indigenous ancestry for material gain. And I didn't gel with that. Like I said, I am not the intended audience, and I almost didn't give a review for the book, but then this stuff kind of came up, and I felt like I needed to. Anyway, I gave it 3 stars. There were, as I say, some really good essays in there that really unpicked some stuff that I hadn't really thought about before, and I got a lot out of. But yeah, there were just a few things in there that just really kind of brought it down for me as a reader, in terms of just some of the stances that she made, and I think she just needed to percolate on those ideas for a little bit longer before writing them down, because I feel like it's the kind of thing that her stance might change on in time, and it's unfortunate that people are going to get hurt by her stance in the meantime. So let's move on. So yeah, it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. The next book that I read, though, was one that I absolutely loved, and that was A Month in the Country by L Carr. This was recommended by Cafe au Livre, and I know I'm saying that wrong because I am not someone who is very good at doing that kind of an accent, so apologies for that. But this was recommended by him on his channel, and I picked it up. It's tiny. And this was one of the books that I really wanted to read this year, and I've managed to do it. So this was fantastic. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Essentially, we've got 2 characters. One is called Tom Burke, and he's the main one, and he's the person whose perspective we're hearing. So he's looking back on his life, specifically one summer when he was employed to essentially uncover a mural in a church. And it was a medieval wall mural that had been covered up, and he was employed to sort of uncover it so that it was visible again and restore it to its former glory. So that's kind of the vibe. This is in the interwar period, so the Great War has just happened, and this character was a soldier, and he's kind of working through some stuff. In the town, he meets another outsider from this little country town, who has come from elsewhere, who is also an ex-soldier, and he's called Charles Moon, and he is also working through some stuff. He has been employed by the same, actually from the same person, to uncover or to locate a missing grave of her ancestor. So we've got these 2 men who are just sort of going about doing this, but it's also, I think, a really reflective novella, I should say, that is really looking at, as they're sort of doing this, how their relationship kind of evolves, and also what is revealed over time about each other. But then also it's kind of about Tom's relationship with the people in the town and how that evolves too, and his opinion of the people in the town changes over time. So it was a really enjoyable read for me. Yeah, very reflective. I love the humor in it as well. And sort of the slowly uncovered medieval wall painting was super interesting. It was, I would say, a highlight of the book, is sort of like him talking about this mural, and his understanding of what's depicted, and the sort of how he can tell that this artist is a really good artist that created this artwork. So yeah, it was great. 5 stars from me. I absolutely loved it. The next book that I read was a non-fiction book, and it is The Euromet by Brain by Matilda Boseley. I'm not really sure how to say the surname of this author. I hadn't heard very much about this book before I picked it up, but I actually listened to it on audiobook. I borrowed it from the library, and I've subsequently bought myself a copy because I wanted to have access, because I knew that there would be visuals in here, such as this, which obviously you don't get on the audio, on the audiobook. So I wanted to have access to the physical copy, and it turned out to not be that expensive, so I was very happy about that. Very, very well written book. This is all about ADHD, and essentially, as the title suggests, it says it's a travel companion for adults who have just found out they have ADHD, and this is sort of in some ways chronicling this author's late diagnosis discovery of ADHD, and then kind of talking through you know, the things that she wishes she knew at the time when she got diagnosed. So this would be a great book to give someone who's just been diagnosed with ADHD, because it would be a super helpful kind of rundown of the kinds of things that they might be going through, and questions they may have, things they might like to learn about themselves that might take a bit longer otherwise if they didn't have a guide like this. So yeah, I would say this is definitely one that if you have ADHD, or even if you just love someone with ADHD and you want to understand them better and how their brain works, then I would highly recommend this one. So the author is a journalist as well, and she really uses her journalistic skills, I would say, to explore this topic really deeply, really broadly. I gave it 5 stars. Highly, highly recommend it. Okay, 2 more books to go. The next one that I finished is actually one that I started a very, very long time ago, and that is Hydra by Adriane Howell. I picked this one up originally because it was longlisted, and then I think also shortlisted for the Stella Prize last year, and I was reading it at the time. I didn't quite get it finished in time for reading it as part of the Stella. So I put it down with the view to come back and finish it off, and then I just didn't. And the reason that I didn't is because it's spooky, and the times I was having time to read and I thought about this book, it was nighttime and it would be too scary to read. So I didn't want to do that. It turns out, well, I guess I just didn't know how scary it was going to get or not. It turns out that it doesn't get that scary, so it probably would have been fine to read at nighttime. But some like spooky stuff happens to the lady in this book. She buys, so she's an antiquarian, someone that works with antiques, and she sort of has these like theories about how antiques should be organized that are based on sort of feelings and like purpose, as opposed to the way that they are normally organized. And she's a bit out there in her field, and then she ends up doing something that gets her fired from her job, and then she kind of spirals. She really, really spirals. Before that's happened, her mum has passed away. Her mum leaves her some money, and then with that money, she not exactly buys, but she gets a 100-year lease on a property, which is technically owned, I think, by the Navy, and sort of has an interesting history. And it's in a really remote seaside location. She's right out of town, and everything kind of gets a bit spooky and a bit scary, let's just say. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who is wanting to read it. So this was kind of marketed to me as a sort of literary contemporary horror. And I would say it is definitely more the kind of mental horror rather than gory horror. The protagonist, Anya, is not particularly likable, and I never really felt like I knew her, even by the end of the book. So that was another thing that I didn't really like about this. The writing, I think, was mostly fine. It just sort of felt a little lost to me, and didn't quite come together in the way I would have liked. So I'd left it for ages and ages, then picked it up and finished it in like a day. And I was just like, yeah, I really shouldn't have waited to finish this. It wasn't as spooky as I imagined it was going to be. So anyway, it ended up being 3 stars for me. Not my favourite, but it was okay. And I would potentially pick up something else that this author has written or writes in the future. I just feel like this didn't quite come together for me. Okay, the last book that I read this month was a doozy in the best possible way, and that was Perilous Times by Thomas D. Lee. I actually borrowed this book from the library, and because I ended up giving it 5 stars, and I have a 5-star shelf where I like to keep my books that are 5 stars for me, I bought myself a copy. So Perilous Times by Thomas D. Lee is a book that is about King Arthur, so it's an Arthurian legend, but set in the modern, well, not even a modern day, it's sort of like a dystopian future. And essentially the Knights of the Round Table back in the day have taken this kind of like magical thing that Merlin has given them that essentially kind of makes them immortal in a sense. So they still die, but then when the realm is in peril, they return. So they kind of like come up through the earth. And that has happened many times in history, you know, including during the World Wars and so on. But in this timeline when Sir Kay, who is Arthur's half-brother, he kind of rises from the ground. He finds himself in an earth that is experiencing a climate crisis, and his tree where he is buried is near a big field where fracking is happening, and so it's obviously causing a lot of problems. And he very quickly meets a young woman whose name was Mariam, and she is essentially an eco-terrorist, and she kind of accidentally blows up the fracking facility. Not intending to, but it happens, and it completely destroys the facility. And creates a further climate issue, an environmental issue. Anyway, he determines that she's on the side of right, and so he kind of follows along with her. We also have, rising in another part of the country, Lancelot. He's the other knight that rises during this perilous situation. And they also, we have Christopher Marlowe, as in the playwright from the time of Shakespeare. He has been alive. He is immortal, essentially. And he is he kind of picks up Lancelot as he always does. So he works for, originally it was for the government, now he's sort of working for a private company. And his idea of which side is the right side is a little bit different from Sir Kay's. And it kind of goes from there. This book is amazing. It's a proper adventurous romp. I love the Arthurian legend part of this. Sir Kay is a great character. Yeah, and it really, this book had a lot of heart, and I also really enjoyed the humour, which was very, I felt, Pratchett-esque. Specifically, there was this, there is a sort of subplot with a man that Sir Kay accidentally turns into a squirrel, and that is the best subplot of this entire book, and I love it with all my heart. So yeah, this was great. I really, really enjoyed this book. I highly recommend it. It is quite long though. Let me see how many pages. 534 pages of story, so it is quite a long one, but it's definitely worth it if you are looking for a book that is about the climate crisis but is kind of like really, really readable. Or if you just really enjoy Arthurian legend, I think you'll enjoy this kind of like interpretation of the characters and what really happened back in the day. So that was Perilous Times. Highly, highly recommend. Okay, those are my books. So we've got these ones plus the, what was the other one that I read? Another Day in the Colony, that I don't have a copy of. But yeah, I had a really good reading month. I'm really pleased with the books that I managed to read. We had 3 5-star books as part of this set of 6, and I think that's a pretty awesome outcome. A 4-star and 2 3 stars. pretty good. I had a great reading month. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books if you've also read them, down in the comments below. Or if you want to just tell me what you read in the month of January, I would also love to hear all about it. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!